Fun times! Today I'm going to be doing a book review of the book Tender is the Flesh. And I thought I could do a professional book review. What did I think? Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. So this is originally translated from Spanish. I believe the author is Argentinian. Is that how you say it? From Argentina? I feel so lucky that this was translated because as you can see, I annotated a lot. I have a lot of notes on my phone, and I've decided for the new year that every time I do a book review, I want to discuss topics that are discussed in the book and not just talk about the book. So it's like a discussion, but this is also going to be spoiler-free. If you haven't already read the book, then these topics might make you want to read the book. So I have some notes on my phone and everything that we're going to go to. We're going to go quite in depth on some of the topics. But first, I'm just going to tell you what the book is about. So this follows, how you say it in Spanish, Marcos Tejo, maybe? So our main character, he's lost his son, he's divorced his wife, and he's quite miserable. He works at like this plantation that farms humans. So the basis of the world is that one day this virus infected all of the animals. So all the pets had to be like killed or thrown out. Humans could no longer eat animal meat, so slowly they started to enter a phase called the transition, which is basically this time period where they slowly started to adapting into farming and eating humans instead. So cannibalism. These books obviously have huge trigger warning for multiple like mutilations and abuses of humans, pretty much the same that we do to animals today. So if that makes you uncomfortable, like I wouldn't say don't read this book, but just be aware of it. Cannibalism, rape is like also a big factor in this book. So it's so interesting because we have this main character, right, who actually doesn't really agree with what's happening with the world, but he does work within the industry because he needs money. This book, topics, I was so passionate about it yesterday to the point where like I know when I talk about certain things, I can come off as quite condescending. And if I do, just know that it's something I'm working on and it's not something I'm feeling, it's just a vibe that I'm giving off. First off, my general thoughts on this book. I gave this book 5 stars. It isn't a perfect book by any means. I would say it's quite easily written, it's easy to read in the language. There's certain parts that are a bit boring. You get to learn about like his dreams and stuff, and I don't feel like that was super interesting. It didn't bring all that much to the story. Like there's some slow parts in the beginning, and honestly it doesn't have that much plot. We're just following like Marcos through in this period of time. Okay, so let's get into the discussion topics. I gave this 5 stars because I adore what the book said, and I feel like it has so many layers, so much commentary, and the most obvious one is obviously that we do these things to animals today, factory farming. To be honest, I didn't really, get affected by this book in that way. Like, this doesn't shock me more than the animal industry does today, and sometimes when I describe to meat eaters what it feels like to me when I see other people eat meat, when they post it on their stories, when I sit down with a meal with my family and they're eating meat. This is pretty much what I'm feeling. For me, it doesn't matter if you're eating a human or an animal. It's wrong to me either way. And it's like this book perfectly encapsulates what I'm feeling when I see other people eating meat, or if I were to eat meat myself. So like I might as well be eating humans. And I understand that's like a hard topic to understand and maybe find it controversial, but in this video I'm going to talk about why I don't think it's so different. So in this book, right, there is a certain type of human who are like first generation, like stock basically, and they are bred from birth all the way up. So they're like pure meat because they are like the food that they're given and everything is measured, and it's like a pure form, because they've been giving all the vaccines, they have controlled the environment and everything. And what they do with these humans is that they cut off their like vocal cords so that they can't like scream or anything, and they're in this like insulated environment. So pretty much exactly what we do with meat factory farming today. And what I find so interesting about this is that these humans are never taught anything. They haven't seen an environment, they don't know how to speak, they don't know how to think. Like they've been so framed from the outside world that they haven't developed those parts of their brain. And I keep thinking about like, what is it in animals that make us able to eat them? Is it because we think that they don't suffer the way that we do? Is it simply because we've always been eating meat? Something I found really interesting about this book is that they describe eating meat as something that saved the world from starvation, which is something that is such a misconception about the meat industry, and we think that we need the meat industry because we need food, but actually the meat industry is a huge part to why there is famine in the world, because we produce more food for the animals than the animals end up being food for us, which is something not everyone knows about, and something this book didn't really address because it played off the fact that like we need meat, when in fact like we don't when it comes to just general famine or like starvation. Like that's not the reason why we eat meat. So I found that's like a thing that this book like didn't really discuss, but that I wish maybe was there because it's not a legitimate reason. And I mean, nothing in this book is a legitimate reason. But like, oh man, now I'm rambling. Let's get into the questions that I wrote down. Oh, now I remember what I was gonna say earlier. So for example, you know what's suffering? Suffering is technically the idea that we are in pain, but the actual suffering comes from the fact that we're in a state that we don't want to be in. And we think that animals like don't have this factor, like they feel pain the way we do, but they don't suffer the way that we do because they don't have the capabilities of imagining being in a different scenario. So they don't suffer the way that humans suffer, which I don't think we can technically prove that they would rather be somewhere else when they're in pain, which is the suffering. So we can't really prove this actually, but I was thinking with these like first generation humans that they breed in this book, I wonder if they also suffer or if they're actually closer to animals than they are to humans in their psyche, because they're never like developed these thinking critical skills that we're capable of, and their brain is much more primal. And because they've only seen like, you know, like these white walls and they're only experienced certain things, is the suffering the same as developed humans, like how we experience it? Or is maybe that's taken away from them because they've never been practicing that part of it and it's actually closer to animals? And then like maybe is it really unethical to eat humans versus eating animals? I think both are unethical, obviously, but is it really that different? Also, something I was thinking about is like all like cosmetics and everything and experiments that we do on animals today, and like rabbits and guinea pigs and pigs and everything has to be done on humans. And I was thinking about that, like how if you knew that makeup and vaccines in particular, imagine that the corona vaccine was tested on humans instead, would you still take it? Would you still buy those makeup products? Which I think is something interesting to consider, because I think a big issue with why we eat meat is that we have this capability of seeing something as other than ourselves, right? Like for example, now I want to be made very clear, I'm not comparing, for example, Black people or people of color to animals. And I'm not comparing those two. I'm comparing our feelings towards something that we see as other to each other. So at one point, like we saw Black people, for example, as like objects to be our slaves. We didn't see them as human. We saw them as like a different species. We thought they thought different. We thought they had different conditions. I don't know, maybe didn't think they felt pain or like anything like that. I don't know. But we have this capability in our mind to switch off our emotions when we see something as other. If something is like animal, or if something is like Black back in the day, it was easy for us to see it as like different from us, and therefore we can torture it, we can treat it differently, they can be our slaves. And I think that mechanism in our head is also what makes us able to eat animals and let these things that happen to animals today and continue eating meat, even though pretty much all of us knows the horrific things that go on in the meat industry. And I think that's so interesting how our brain can compartmentalize certain types of torture that are happening in the world. And I feel like most people don't understand that if you're paying something, like if you're paying someone to slaughter your meat, you are the killer of that thing. And it's like you don't really think about that, or I'm not saying you, but a lot of people don't think about that. And I wish more people would consider the implications of what this is doing to our brain and how we are able to let certain horrific things happen, and what that says about us as humans and other things happening today that we, like reading this book from the outside, we might find horrific because we can see it so clearly that like you don't want to eat your friends and family. And onto that, I wonder if I wrote it down. Something really, really interesting is this one scene. I think it's probably my favorite scene where Marcos goes and visits his sister. His sister has two twins and they've grown up after the transition, so they've only been eating human meat ever. And they have this game going on. Let me see if I can find it. It's actually on page 100 in my copy, where the kids have created this game in school as well. It's called Exquisite Corpse, which is what I believe the original title of this book is in Spanish. The game is that you basically guess what your friends and family taste like. And it's so funny, this part. It's funny because it's so ironic. This part where the mother says, "I've had it with this game. We don't eat people. Or are the two of you savages?" And I found this so interesting. To me, that was a direct correlation between how we see pets and meat we eat as different. There is no different. A pig is just as intelligent as a dog. There is no difference between them. But in our brain, we've separated like dogs we don't eat, most of us, and then we have like pigs it's fine to eat because they're our pets and they're a family, and so we don't consider them meat, but it's the same thing, you know, it's exactly the same thing, but it's just how we view it. And it's so interesting how like this family eats meat, or like special meat is what they call it, like human meat, but they're all of a sudden savages when they think about eating their friends. And I love that comparison and I love that scene. And actually, this made me think about another thing. These are just like topics that aren't necessarily discussed in this book, but that this book like triggered in me. And that is like, would you rather eat meat from an animal who's been tortured, who suffered their entire life, or eat meat from a human that willingly gives up their life for you? And I was like, whoa, like that's such a weird comparison, because ethically, you should eat the human, but will you though? Will you though? This book really, really plays on your emotions and the way that we think certain things are okay and other things are not okay, when there's not a difference. There's no logical way of why we see certain things like this. And I think it's something that like we do to be able to cope with the horrific things that happen and continue life the way that makes it comfortable for us. I love all the things that this book made me think about. And like there's this other scene where basically our main character goes to the zoo. The zoo part is like something I didn't really connect with either, but there's this part where these puppies that he has met and he's like cuddled with, because it's also this whole conspiracy that maybe animals didn't have a virus and it's just a way for the government to control the population. And another interesting element in this book that was kind of like mentioned but never really dived into is the fact that like white-skinned meat is much more expensive than black or colored skin meat. And I felt like it's just like it's such a like it's so good the way that these things are just normalized, because they're normalized in our society too. We just don't think about it in the extreme sense of like how horrific these scenarios is, but it's like this in our world too. It's just as horrific, but it's so normalized, just like in this book. It's so normalized that we think it's not horrific, but it is. And it's just like, it's so good the way that this book like plays with your emotions. So the puppies are at one point, there's these teenagers torturing the puppies. I felt so much more for these puppies that were being tortured, rather than knowing that pregnant women are having their arms and legs cut off because they shouldn't hurt their baby so that they can become meat. The baby can become meat because the mother understands it's in danger, so they cut off the arms of the mother and legs. And it's just that's so horrific, and it's just so well done the way that these scenarios are put next to each other, and you get to face those feelings within yourself and start to reflect on why those feelings are there and why I care more about these puppies than this other scenario, which is obviously much worse, you know? This book in itself didn't really disgust me. I've read the book Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. It's a nonfiction about the meat factory farming, mostly in the US. And I think everything that happens in that book is also happening to humans here, and I don't really see why one would be worse than the other. So I read about all the things that are bad in that book, but what disgusts me the most surrounding this book is how other people see this book as disgusting and horrific, and a lot of them will continue eating meat after this and not consider the repercussions or the way that this book affected them and why. and start reflecting on those emotions. And I just found that that part really disgusts me, how people talk about this book, how it's so disgusting, and yet they're part of this system. Most people are part of this system, and like, it just blows my mind how that's possible. You know, you read this book about normalized cannibalism and how we are pretty much doing the same, and it's just like, and people just don't see it that way because we're living in this society, and that's just how it is, you know? Wow. Something that I noticed with this book too is like, when, for example, we have a meat industry that does this, you can tell that the people who are in charge of the meat industry in this book are basically these sociopath humans that think it's okay to do this. Like, the people working at these plantations, the people who are in charge, the people who allow these things to happen, they're like not right in the mind. And I think it's interesting to consider that when we live in an economy and a world that values eating meat so much and normalizes so much, then I think it's interesting to consider that who are the people in charge who let the society be like this, and if they think this is okay, then what other things do they think that are okay, and do we really want those kind of people in charge of our society? And that also made me think, like, what if all the world leaders around the world were vegetarians, and what impact would that be or have in the world? Now, I'm not saying that vegetarians would be better leaders, but like, I think there's something it does to your mind that's very unhealthy, and I don't think we like talk about that enough. It's not only about the meat, it's like about how things that you allow happen to yourself and how you take part in a toxic reality. I just don't think it's healthy for a person to do those things, and it's just like made me think about, like, what if the leaders of the world were vegetarians? That's not to say that meat eaters can't be great people. Obviously, but I think it would be a different world for sure. Another part that a question I wanted to throw out to everyone watching this review: if you read this book and you're continuing eating meat and your perspectives on eating animal meat or animals hasn't changed, please discuss with me in the comments, because I would love to know your thoughts surrounding that and how this book didn't affect you, or how you think it's different from our world. Because the interesting part, the psychology part of it, humans that have been bred in captivity, how different are they from animals really? Which is, I think, the interesting part in this book. And animals are like not different from us, but we think they are. So that was like everything I was going to discuss in this book. I did have some pros and cons in this book. Oh, the ending. I think it's like a stereotypical dystopian ending, but I adored it. I loved it. I think it was very strong. The last line in the book like really hit me, and I was sitting there afterwards like staring into nothingness, like trying to think about what I just read and like what the main character just did. And it's like, it's wow. Ending was brilliant, but I will say I kind of saw it coming. It's like a little bit predictable, but it was just as powerful, which I thought was even more incredible. Other than like some parts that I didn't connect with the book, some slow parts, like I feel like this book could have been cut, and that actually I think someone who doesn't really care about these topics, which is like, why wouldn't you care about these topics? But if you for some reason don't care about these topics, I don't think this book is so good, because like psychologically it plays with your feelings and scenarios so well when they put it up next to each other, but it's like the writing and the structure isn't really that advanced or amazing, but I still loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's incredible, and I think everyone should read it and sit with those emotions that the book gives you. So that is going to be it for my review. Thank you so much for watching this like long, rambly rant discussion on this book, but I'm just really passionate about it, and I clearly like highlighted and annotated a lot. I had a great experience with it. I was like furiously writing in this book, and it was like quite addicting. So highly recommend it. Comment down below all your thoughts on the things I've talked about on this book. I hope we have a brilliant, amazing day. I hope we talk soon. Subscribe, like this video, click the bell button if you want notifications when I upload, as well as Storygraph and Goodreads links will be down below if you want to follow me there, and we can chat about books, as well as Instagram. You can chat about books with me everywhere. So have a brilliant day, and bye guys!